Hello everyone. This video will show how to find the inverse and how to restrict a quadratic function in two possible ways. Now let's go over this example right here. Determine the inverse of this quadratic function and restrict the domain of this function that is given right here in two possible ways. Now, the first step that we need to do here is to determine the vertex for this function. Looking at this represents as our h and this represents as our k. So we can go ahead and say that the vertex for this quadratic function right here is on -1, 4. We're going to need this to restrict this function. Now let's go over the steps on how to find its inverse. So the first step is to change this f of x to y. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that on the side right here. The second step is to switch the y to x and x to y. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that up here. The next step is to isolate y by itself. We can do this by subtracting 4 from both sides. So that means we are going to clear everything on the right side so that we're left with y. So the first step that we need to do is subtract 4 from both sides. So the equation is going to come out. Now we are going to divide -3 from both sides because again, we wanted the y by itself. We are going to square root both sides so that we can cross out the squared. Now, we remember that if we square root both sides, this side right here will have two signs. It's both positive and negative. So that we can go ahead and rewrite this as, since we want y by itself, we're going to go ahead and subtract 1 from both sides. Please notice that there are two signs for this, the plus and the minus. This is the reason why we need to restrict this given function right here to match up with this plus and minus. Now let's start with the plus first. Since we have a plus here, so I go ahead and just write the plus for this. Please remember that if we use the plus for this sign right here, we are going to restrict this given function right here such that our x is greater than or equal to the h value, which is -1. So please make sure that we are using the h value in the restricted part. And please remember that if it is a positive, it's going to be greater than. So if this is positive, it's going to be greater than the h. Now let's sketch this graph on Desmos. Please notice that if we do not restrict it, the quadratic function has two parts. So then we go ahead and cut one of them. That means we're going to restrict one of them from the vertex. And so if I add x is greater than or equal to -1, notice that the two graphs are now inverse of each other without an extra part for the quadratic. Now let's have the negative part. So for the negative part, we are going to remember that if it's a negative, we are going to have x is less than equal to the h, which is -1. So notice that the h is important in restricting the domain of a quadratic function. So let's look at these two graphs on Desmos. Again, please notice that if we don't restrict the quadratic function, they don't match up. So what are we going to do is we're going to restrict it. It's going to be x less than equal to -1. And if you notice, these two are already inverse of each other, which means they're symmetric along the y equals x line. So these are the answers right here. Now let's go over another example. At this time, I would encourage you to pause this video and try this problem out on your own. And when you're done, unpause it and check your answer. Okay, so we go over this problem right here. We first find the vertex of this quadratic function that we have right here. This function can be written as 5 and that is x minus 0 squared minus 3. So we don't really, or you can have plus 0 there. So even if it's a plus or minus 0, it doesn't really change it. So the 0 don't have to be written in there. So that means that our vertex is located at 0, negative 3. So then we go ahead and determine its inverse. So looking at this, we can go ahead and write the positive part of this equation. So notice that I paired up the positive. So we're looking at the positive, and that's a positive right there. I got that from here. So we go ahead and restrict the given quadratic function right here. Remember, if it's a positive, the restricted part here will be x is greater than equal to the h. In this case, we have a 0. So I go ahead and write x is greater than or equal to 0. Again, we always remember it's always the h value that we take here to restrict it. So that if we take the negative part, so for the negative part, so if it's negative, it's going to be less than the h value or equal to the h value, which is 0. Again, always remember, it's always the h that we're going to use to restrict it. Now, I would encourage you to try to graph these two equations right here and see if they are inverse of each other, which means that they are symmetric with respect to the line of symmetry y is equal to x. So that is how we find the inverse of a quadratic function and how to restrict the quadratic function in two possible ways.